The studio lights blazed down on Megyn Kelly as she faced the camera, her expression sharp and inquisitive. "Quick question about Harry and Meghan," she began, her voice crisp with curiosity. Tom Bower, whose barn burner of a book about the royal family was #1 everywhere, was on with our mutual friend Dan Wooten talking about Harry's autobiography, which is slated for release this November. Welcome to iStudio. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with the promise of unfolding drama. According to Dan and others, the royal family does not want to see the publication of this book. They fear and believe that it's going to be very negative about the royal family. Given the fact that the Queen just died, the timing is far from ideal. So Bower goes on with Dan during GB News' royal coverage, and here's what happens. She turned to her guest. "What do you make of that, Nigel?" Nigel Farage, ever the charismatic politician, chuckled lightly, leaning back in his seat with a knowing smile. "Tom Bower is the biographer of our times," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and insight. "He's written the most incredible books about members of the royal family, about big business figures, political figures, Boris Johnson, Richard Branson, you name it. I'm very pleased that it wasn't him but somebody else who wrote a big biography about me, because Tom Bower is really good at putting his finger on those personality flaws. But we all have them, of course. We all have them." Farage's tone shifted, growing more serious. "So, would Harry go ahead with this book?" "Well, think about this. When the Oprah Winfrey interview happened, right? Harry and Meghan knew that his grandfather was at death's door. They knew that Philip was not going to make his 100th birthday, and that was only 10 weeks away. And they still went ahead with the interview." The audience could almost feel the tension rise as Farage continued, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "This trip to the UK, they came here this time, you know. Meghan gave a speech up in Manchester. They went to Dusseldorf for an event. Do you know they weren't even going to visit the Queen on this trip? I thought Charles's words in the King's speech were very interesting. He talked about Kate, or Catherine as we're now branding her, and William as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. But when he referred to Harry and Meghan, he didn't call them the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. No, 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 no. He talked about my love for Harry, Meghan, and their family who are now building their new life overseas. This is what King Charles III said, and I read into that. You're living on the west coast of America. We want nothing to do with you. Please stay there." Meghan nodded, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Interesting. Well, I did think it was interesting that Meghan comes over. She goes out there to sort of shake the hands of people. And let's be honest about it. Meghan and Harry made the Queen's last 2 years much more difficult than they needed to be. I mean, there's something galling about seeing them glad-handing with the mourners. Name me somebody else who caused more agita to the poor Queen in her last 2 years of life than those two, right?" Nigel leaned in, his expression grave. "Yeah, it was so disrespectful. It was so wrong in every way. But I'll tell you what's interesting. The Queen's coffin will arrive at Buckingham Palace in about 2.5 hours' time, and there will be a military detachment, of course. There will be the King and the Queen consort. There will be the Prince and Princess of Wales. But the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not be there. And what this tells you, through the words King Charles used, through the very fact they will not be there to meet the Queen's body as it arrives in Buckingham Palace, and goodness me, what a somber, emotional moment that's going to be in 2.5 hours. The fact they're not there tells you everything." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The firm, as the royal family has known, have effectively excommunicated them because they know Harry will go ahead with this book. Do it to make money and do his best not just to damage the monarchy and his own father and brother, but he'll do it because he wants to damn the United Kingdom, the British around the world. I've never seen such disloyalty in all of my life. Quite what Meghan's done to him. How it's come to this, I simply don't know. Meghan's eyes flickered with a mix of frustration and disbelief. She was glad-handing with the mourners the other day, and it made news that a few of them refused to shake her hand. You can see it in the video. A couple of women just looked down or didn't extend the hand. And now you've got Meghan's followers on Twitter, and we're showing the video for the people who watch us on YouTube. The woman putting on her sunglasses avoids Meghan. Then there's a woman in a dark blue shirt with gray hair who clearly does not want to shake her hand. And now you've got all these people on Twitter accusing these women, wait for it, of racism. Racists because they... Nigel interjected, shaking his head. Do you know what? Are we getting slightly bored with all this? I mean, you know this. I mean, the use of this word. We should stop. You know what? We should stop even worrying about it. It's become utterly meaningless. It's a substitute for any form of engagement or intelligent debate. And I think we've got to just stop worrying about all these attacks. They mean nothing. Meghan nodded in agreement, her expression resolute. What do you make of the Oprah thing? Because I will say, Oprah weighed in on Meghan and Harry today. I mean, she was in on ground zero of the racism accusation Meghan and Harry launched against the royal family, and now Oprah's calling for sort of a healing moment. Nigel sighed, his face betraying a hint of exasperation. Yeah, well, that is true, of course. I mean, there's barely a family on the planet where someone's not speaking about someone. I mean, that's just the way family is. Meghan smiled slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words. Well, it's true. It's true. Nigel leaned forward, his eyes earnest. Very true. And then we all come together, you know. It's the uncle's funeral or whatever it is, and we all come together, and it is an opportunity for rapprochement to be made. There was a minor rapprochement when William reached out, and they went out, as you say, in Windsor and looked at the flowers and met some of the mourners there. But it has no long-term future if he's going to go ahead with this book. So, Oprah, sorry, I'm not with you at all. And can I just say also, she must be the worst interviewer on the planet. The idea that Oprah Winfrey is this big genius. Well, so what happened with that interview? Because the first half of it was with Meghan. Halfway through, Harry gets dragged in, directly contradicts some of the things that Meghan has said in the first half, and Winfrey didn't even pick up on it. So, I'm not particularly impressed with her ability to do interviews and to find out the truth. The conversation ended, leaving viewers with much to ponder. In the world of royal intrigue, where loyalty and betrayal danced hand in hand, the saga of Harry and Meghan continued to captivate and divide. Would Harry go through with his book? Only time would tell, but one thing was clear: the echoes of their choices would resonate for years to come. Let's hear your thoughts in the comment section. Remember to click the subscribe button and enable the bell icon, as well as share and like the video for more in-depth stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video. Here's Morgan settled into his seat, a familiar spark in his eyes as the cameras rolled. Well, in a moment I'll speak to Meghan's half-brother Thomas Jr. exclusively, he announced, his voice carrying a mix of anticipation and resolve. He leaned forward, the studio lights reflecting off his polished desk. Here's a short reminder of what Meghan and Harry said about her father in their show, including a series of supposedly private messages she sent to him when it emerged he was too ill to attend their wedding. Welcome to iStudio. Joining me now is Meghan's half-brother, Thomas Jr. Thomas, thank you for joining me. First of all, how is your father, Thomas Sr.? Thomas Jr. smiled, though a hint of weariness lingered in his eyes. Oh, hey guys, it's good to be here. Dad is doing very well, making a lot of progress. He's in good spirits. Sometimes he doesn't feel that comfortable to actually make a live appearance, but he's doing very well. Piers nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. You're there caring for him. He had a massive stroke, and I think at one stage, for quite a while, he lost the power of his speech. Has that returned now? Is he able to communicate with you? Thomas Jr. sighed, a mixture of relief and lingering concern in his voice. Yeah, his speech is definitely coming back. We're making a lot of progress with the speech therapy. For the most part, it's pretty normal. It just goes off after a few moments but comes back. So he's doing very well. I'm just very happy that I could be here every day for him since this happened. Let's begin with this clips of Meghan's heartfelt pleas.
Paps and journalists and media were following him all day, every day. The unraveling happened that week when he wouldn't pick up my call. And instead you're talking to TMZ.
He had a heart attack 6 days ago.
Which is crazy.
Calling.
This is not him saying, oh, I don't want to be there.
No, I get it. I'm not saying.
And the world is watching this drama play out.
Of course, it's incredibly sad what happened. She had a father before this, and now she doesn't have a father.
The conversation shifted, and Piers leaned in, his tone more direct. Were you both watching the first half of this series today? Thomas Jr. chuckled lightly, shaking his head. Let's see. I think he was. He wasn't able to join us, though. I mean, he really wanted to be here. I was watching it, and I'm just glad I had my Studio Magic tear pen with me, so I could have a tear come out of my left eye while I was watching it. Piers couldn't help but smile at the remark. I mean, that moment when Prince Harry, who has never met your father, says that Meghan has no father. What did you think of that? Thomas Jr.'s expression darkened. I think it's horrible. The documentary is so far off on so many different levels. It's just really disturbing. Saying that she doesn't have a family and she doesn't have a father, and then Harry saying that she has no father now. That's just ridiculous. Piers nodded in agreement, his voice steady. Yeah, it's incredibly hurtful. I also have always had sympathy with your father because I felt that he was thrown to the wolves with no experience of dealing with this kind of intense media attention. He tried to do the right thing. He came unstuck, and they just disowned him. Has she made any attempt to contact your father since he had his stroke? Thomas Jr.'s response was immediate, his frustration palpable. None whatsoever. And you know, I totally agree with you on the fact that none of us were ever coached or given any help with the paparazzi or press since the very beginning, which has caused a lot of problems. Nobody reached out. I actually reached out, and all I got back was distant family and she doesn't know us, which is just very bizarre how she just basically brushed the entire family under the carpet like we don't exist, and then lied about not having a family and lied about not having the family that she's always wanted. We've always been here. The documentary's way off. I mean, that's what's actually prompted me to work with my own production team. We're going to have our side of a documentary that's going to shed a lot of light. Piers leaned back, a contemplative look on his face. Well, I don't blame you. I mean, if this were one of my family doing this to my family, I'd want to do the same thing and set the record straight. It seems to me that she's decided you're all too big a problem. Therefore, you have to be cut loose. And I gotta be honest, I knew Meghan for a bit before she met Harry. She did exactly the same to me. Bam, you know, done. She did that to many people that she knew, that she'd either worked with or was friends with or whatever. It just seems to me she's what I would call a ruthless social climber who just, when people are no longer appropriate parts of her circle, they have to be expunged quickly so she can move on up a ladder. Thomas Jr. nodded vigorously, his agreement clear. Absolutely. And I think a lot of greed plays into that fact also. I mean, the amount of unprecedented files, photos, videos, and documentation that we're going to be including in our documentary, it's going to tell a whole different story. I think the general public in the UK and America knows now that the Markles aren't bad people. We're just like a normal family, like everybody else. We do exist. When one person tells lies and then tells 10 other lies to cover the one lie, it keeps on going. You end up looking ridiculous. Piers leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. There's a staggering moment, Thomas, where Ashley, who is, I think, your niece, Samantha's daughter, befriended Megyn and was going to go to the wedding. Then Megyn is apparently advised by some flunky at the palace that it wouldn't be a good idea because Samantha's not invited. So, this is what Ashley had to say.
I think I said I was hurt on some level, but I understood where it was coming from. To know that it was because of my biological mother that this relationship that's so important to me was impacted in that way. To feel like because of her it was taken away has been hard.
Piers continued, a note of disbelief in his voice. Yeah, it was actually because of Megyn that it was taken away. Megyn could have had her there if she wanted to have her there. Instead, she wanted to have a bunch of celebrities she barely knew, from the Clooneys to the Beckhams to Elton John to James Corden to Timbuktu. I mean, it looked like anyone she'd met on the party circuit in the previous 2 years got the invite, but a lot of Harry's friends weren't there, and nor was this niece who she makes a big thing in the documentary saying they were so close. Thomas Jr.'s frustration was evident. Yeah, well, there you have it. One lie turns into 20 other lies. She didn't have a family, so therefore nobody was invited. I mean, who doesn't invite their family to a wedding, especially a royal wedding? And it's not like anybody in my family asked her for one nickel or anything ever. We were all actually happy for her when all this happened, but the slow turn of events showed the true colors of this woman. Piers leaned back, a thoughtful look on his face. When you finish watching today, these first 3 episodes, what was your kind of overview about what's happened to Megyn? And indeed, what do you think of Harry? Thomas Jr. sighed, a mixture of disbelief and frustration in his voice. Well, my general overview is I can't believe that she was able to be in this position, all by my father's doing, by the way, to be in that position and to know what you're getting yourself into, and then go in there and try and change a 1,000-year-old tradition and monarchy to your own liking. Who does that? It's still a big question. My father and we talk about it quite a bit. I mean, how could you even consider doing that? Everything every woman in their life could ever dream of, you had, and you had to go and make waves and accusations and be difficult and overall, you know, taking Harry away from his family. Piers nodded solemnly. Right. I'm afraid I think you've completely described it. Like I said, Thomas, I gotta leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Please send your father my best, won't you? Because I've been concerned about him. I'm glad to hear he's on the mend. It's obviously been a scary time for you and the family. Please send him my very best. Thomas Jr. smiled, the gratitude clear in his voice. Absolutely will do. Thank you so much for having me. Let's hear your thoughts in the comment section. Remember to click the subscribe button and enable the bell icon as well as share and like the video for more in-depth stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video. Candace Owens stood before a packed auditorium, her presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. Her voice, sharp and clear, cut through the murmurs as she began her critique of Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. All right, she started, her tone laced with incredulity. "Let me tell you why this book, Spare, by Prince Harry, deeply upsets me." She paused, allowing the anticipation to build. "It deeply upsets me because I, like everybody else in the world, had a fantasy in my head of what the royal family must be like. It was the mystery that we were all invested in. We wanted to believe that, I don't know, they frolic through the woods, that they sit down and write poetry whenever they have a spare moment, that they have these wonderful discussions and debates at the dinner table. Welcome to iStudio." She leaned forward, engaging the audience directly. "Didn't you all have that image in your heads? That they were somehow better than us, above us?" Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The secret shrouded in secrecy was the royal family. And then something happened. Prince Harry opened his mouth. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Candace had their full attention now. And now we know, at least in terms of Prince Harry, that they're basically, I wouldn't even say just like the Kardashians. There are elements of this book that I actually do believe are below what Kim Kardashian would even publicize. She raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think that there are elements in this book that Kim Kardashian would go, you know what, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. It's a little too private for me." The audience laughed again, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "So, I'm going to start by giving you some alternative titles for this book," Candace continued. "It could have just been called Jealous. I think that's appropriately adjusted. Jealous of who? Willie, his brother. This is literally one long reading of a younger brother who has always been jealous of his older brother and is going to tell you a bunch of mundane stories about his older brother that every single person in the entire world that has a sibling has lived through, and yet he thinks it makes him a special snowflake." She paused, letting the words sink in. It could have been called Unbearable, maybe Unsparable, a playoff of Unbearable, Unsparable. And it could just be a story about how this special, privileged little snowflake wants you to sit through him whining, pages and pages, chapters and chapters of him whining about having an incredibly privileged childhood. I think it also should have been entitled Middle Child Syndrome. Now, you might be thinking, he does, they don't have another sibling, it's just two of them. Yeah, but these are classic symptoms of middle child syndrome that he's displaying. Candace's voice grew more animated. "I know because I am a middle child and I know what it's like. You have an older sibling and a younger sibling, and you feel like nobody hears you, nobody sees you, and everything's secondhand. Yeah, I think middle child syndrome would have been a good title for this book, but don't let me tell you. Let me jump right into providing you some passages, and let's just start with the prologue of the book, because this is actually in it. Ready?" She read from the book, mimicking Harry's voice with exaggerated disdain. Asterisk all at once. Something shifted inside of me. I looked at Willie, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since we were boys. I took it all in, his familiar scowl, which had always been his default in dealings with me, his alarming baldness, more advanced than my own, his famous resemblance to Mummy, which was fading with time, with age. In some ways, he was my mirror. In some ways, he was my opposite. My beloved brother, my arch nemesis. How had this happened? Asterisk. Candace lowered the book, looking at the audience with wide eyes. His alarming baldness? He's alarmed by his brother's receding hairline? He felt the need to put that in a book because it's petty and it's small to offer commentary on how your brother is losing his hair. And it's petty and small to say that you don't even look like Mummy anymore because you lost your hair. Petty and small is really what this book is all about. She continued, her voice rising in incredulity. Now, what's incredible is that Harry obviously grew up in palaces. Palaces. So there's just no way that we can connect, right? How many of us have grown up in palaces? How many of us can write a passage in our book about how we grew up in a castle with our brother, a castle that had 50 bedrooms? He's talking about the castle in Scotland, which was one of the Queen's favorites. Balmoral had 50 bedrooms, he says in Chapter 2, one of which had been divided for me and Willie. Adults called it the nursery. Willie had the larger half, with a double bed, a good-sized basin, a cupboard with mirrored doors, a beautiful window looking down in the courtyard, the fountain, the bronze statue of a roe deer buck. My half of the room was far smaller, less luxurious. I never asked why. I didn't care, but I also didn't need to ask. 2 years older than me, Willie was the heir, whereas I was the spare. She looked out at the audience, shaking her head. Well, you see, Harry, what happens when you divide a room is that somebody does have to get the less better half. Somebody gets the view, somebody doesn't. And typically, Harry, in case no one has ever told you this, the older sibling always gets the bigger room, the bigger side, the bigger everything, because they're the older sibling. This is not unique to you. It is not because you are the spare. It is not because he is the heir. This happens in households all over the world. In fact, I am one of 3 sisters, and we had an older brother. My older brother. Would you believe us 3 sisters had to share a room while our older brother got his own room growing up? Were we the 3 spares? Is it worthy of putting it into a book? Of course not. The audience chuckled, nodding along with her. But it's not enough, because he goes on to describe this dynamic. She continued, reading another passage. Asterisk, I was brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. I was summoned to provide backup, distraction, diversion, and, if necessary, a spare part. Kidney, perhaps. Blood transfusion. A speck of bone marrow. This was all made explicitly clear to me from the start of life's journey and regularly reinforced thereafter. Asterisk. Candace shook her head, exasperated. Can you believe that? He really thinks he was brought into the world as a spare part for his brother. And he wants us to feel sorry for him. Sorry for the prince who grew up in palaces, who had every privilege imaginable. It's incredible. Oh? Do you? She challenged, her voice dripping with skepticism. Does anybody actually believe that it was made explicitly clear to him that they might need him for a speck of bone marrow? How it works. It's just because you're siblings. Hey, I want to be very clear, second sibling. You are here for a speck of bone marrow. You're here for a blood transfusion, perhaps a kidney, perhaps. That's why you're here, and we want to make that explicit. The room erupted in applause, the audience clearly on Candace's side. She had done it. She had taken Harry's tale and laid it bare, showing it for what it truly was, a tale of ordinary sibling rivalry dressed up in royal trappings. And as she stepped away from the podium, the crowd's cheers followed her, a testament to her ability to see through the facade and call out the mundane for what it was. Let's hear your thoughts in the comment section. Remember to click the subscribe button and enable the bell icon, as well as share and like the video for more in-depth stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.